No, anybody else.
This is the message for everybody watching
yes.
live. Defund the police. That's what the people's budget is all about.
Oh, it's Albert. Hey, Albert, can you help us get in there?
Doing good?
Can you help us figure out how to get in there? I don't have my phone because there's now new rules that they're telling us.
What? I just thought I'd say hello because I saw y'all.
But you know,
We'd appreciate
I'm
it.
gonna ask you something. Good to see you.
That's for Zach.
How big is that
Well, this is
chamber?
okay because it could also
It's huge.
be. This
Yeah, I'm
also
like,
work
what
in our
do they
favor.
need
If
there
they
at
don't
capacity?
after he did all this shit,
After all of
if
the
they-
social
if they
distancing
don't
measures.
let us in, then it's gonna be a problem. And we already have the thing tonight. Are you able to hop on tonight, Seven? We're doing yeah.
All of the presenters, there are 3 microphones, so if you're okay, Chair,
That's fine.
have to go, and then everyone else, if you could go down into the pews and just socially distance, we would really appreciate that.
You got
And
it.
then one more thing, if I could ask you, it's gonna be broadcast, so that we ask that everything else, every other device, just not be live broadcasting at the same time, because it's gonna be on front of us as a live broadcast.
So we're not allowed to do our,
No, she asked.
it was a
I
request.
just want to be obvious with it.
Okay.
So keep the phone down a little bit right now.
We're now entering into the chamber where we're lifting up the people's budget.
started, members, I certainly want to give Mr. Krikorian an opportunity to say a few words. Just want to thank all of you for being here this morning. I'd like to start with introductions and also reference the committee that you chair because I think it's important for this conversation. I'm Nuri Martinez, the president of the City Council. Thank you very much for being here. As I said, in trying to figure out a time to meet, was committed to opportunity to say a few words. Just want to thank all of you for being here this morning. I'd like to start with introductions and also reference the committee that you chair because I think it's important for this conversation. I'm Nuri Martinez, the president of the City Council. Thank you very much for being here. As I said, in trying to figure out a time to meet, was committed to hearing the people's budget, and I wanted to do it in a way where we can all have a conversation. For you all to present your presentation and for all of us to sort of weigh in to try to figure out how to work together moving forward. So why don't we start with Mr. O'Farrell?
Thank you, Madam President. Good morning, and thank you. It's a real pleasure for me to be here to hear this presentation, and I want to thank Budget Chair Paul Krikorian for inviting me here, and I want to welcome everyone to LA City Hall.
And the committee you chair, sir?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. I chair the Homelessness and Poverty Committee on the LA City Council.
And welcome. I'm honored to have been asked, Mr. Krikorian. I appreciate the invitation to participate, and I'm looking forward to having a very fruitful conversation with all of you.
Good morning. Sorry. Good morning. I'm Paul Krikorian. I chair the Budget Committee. I want to thank our council president for bringing all of us together today. I think this was an important opportunity for us to hear, first of all, directly from you about the work that you've done and the community input that you've received. In the time that I've been budget chair, one of my most important goals has been to try to engage the community as much as I can in the budget process. This is an important next step forward, and I hope it'll be the beginning of an ongoing increased outreach effort, because if people have felt that they've been disengaged from the budget process, then I feel like I need to take responsibility for that and ensure that as we go forward, that is no longer the case, because it's essential that our budget reflect the input of all of the people of Los Angeles. I'm proud to say that in the 8 years that I've been budget chair, every budget that we've passed has passed with the unanimous vote of all 15 members of the council, representing every part of Los Angeles. But we can always do better. We can always do better to ensure that everyone is included in this process. So I want to thank the council president for organizing this opportunity for us to all come together, because this isn't just about the budget. It's also about developing ongoing sustainable policies that lift people up in all communities of Los Angeles. And that's why it's important to have the other members here who chair the most significant policy committees as well. So welcome everyone, and thank you for being here.
Thank you. Greetings, Curran Price. I chair the Economic Development Committee and co-chair of the Budget Committee. And I'm just excited that you're here. This is history. It's history. And so I'm proud that our council is open to figuring out how we can do a better job, how we can collaborate in ways that we haven't before. And so this is a moment that I think is going to call on all of us to do all we can do and things that we must do. And I guess, again, I just appreciate your presence. I'm excited about the opportunity to not just discuss, but to solve some problems, to reallocate priorities. And so that's a process I think we all are ready for, and how we get there is another story. But I'm excited that we're starting here. Thank you.
Over to you.
So my name is this on? I don't know if yeah.
Can you check her mic, please?
Yeah. Okay, so my name is Melina Abdullah. I know many of you, and we're thankful for this space. We're thankful that you've allowed us or opened up City Council, especially during this time, for us to present the people's budget. I'm an organizer and co-founder of Black Lives Matter Los Angeles. And we have in the room as presenters, Kendrick Sampson from Build Power, who's also an actor. And I'll say something later to you, Councilmember Wesson, you know what we're saying, right?
I loved you and fashionably yours, by the way.
We have soon to be Dr. David Turner, who's our lead researcher on the people's budget. We have who we lovingly call Baba Akili. You can call him Akili, who is one of the core team members for Black Lives Matter Los Angeles and has been doing justice work for decades, first trained by Cesar Chavez, and has trained many of us in this movement. And then Reverend Ray Huang, who's going to be talking about our the coalition that we've convened. So we just wanted to start by talking about what the People's Budget is. Hopefully you all have seen our website, thepeoplesbudgetla.com, peoplesbudgetla.com. It's at the bottom of the title slide. And again, we want to lift up that we're appreciative of the space and especially the leadership of Council President Martinez and Council President Emeritus Wesson for inviting us in and all of you all for being here. We want to lift up that normally, had we been invited into this space, this entire chamber would be full. That wasn't an option this morning. But we want to be clear that while there are 5 of us sitting here and 7 of us in the room, that we represent a really broad coalition that Reverend Ray will talk about, and that there are dozens of folks who've led to the direct work, who've brought about the direct work of this people's budget. And so we're just appreciative of everyone who's lent their time and energy and expertise to developing the people's budget. We are all volunteers. So we want to lift up that Black Lives Matter Los Angeles is a volunteer-led organization. Nobody gets a paycheck from BLM. This is what we do in addition to our jobs, in addition to our parenting work, in addition to being community members. All of us are here because we want a better Los Angeles and a better world. We also want to lift up that thousands and really tens of thousands have engaged in the work that developed people's budget. So it's really important to say that although you see 7 of us, there are tens of thousands behind us watching Channel 35, watching the live stream right now. And we also want to name that this moment is one that is built out of many years of organizing. And so for almost as long as you've been budget chair, we have been countering the mayor's budget proposals that every year tick up in terms of police spending. So about 5 years ago, we first saw the mayor's pie chart, which showed that over 50% of the city's general fund was going to LAPD. We were shocked and outraged by that. And everyone we engaged in was equally outraged, no matter where they lived in the city, no matter what their political perspective was. No one really realized that upwards of 50% of the city's general fund was going to police. And so Baba Akili is actually in a moment going to walk us through what that means and how this year's demand kind of unfolded, beginning with before the murder of George Floyd. So we want to be very clear that we've been calling for the defunding of police for at least 5 years. But this is a moment where the world has cracked open and you all have the opportunity to really be courageous and do something different in the city of Los Angeles. And we see different things happening throughout the country and throughout the world. So we want to be also clear that when Councilmember Krikorian says all 15 council members have signed off on the budget each year, this year's kind of default passage of the mayor's budget doesn't do the idea that the city council is signing off on the mayor's budget without a participatory budgeting process is problematic for us. So just as much as we're looking at the budget, we're also looking at the process. There are cities around the country who engage in participatory budgeting. So I mentioned that we all have real jobs. My job, not that organizing is not a real job, it is, it's just an unpaid one. My paid job is actually as a professor and as a researcher. And part of the work that I do is around questions of democracy. Participatory budgeting is one of these things that we've been talking about for the last couple of decades, around the way in which cities and counties and states and even the federal government should be engaging its citizenry and residents in the process of figuring out how they want to invest their dollars, because these are our dollars, right? I know that you all control purse strings, but these are really the people's dollars. And so that's kind of the sentiment that we're coming from. And again, we just want to implore you to take advantage of the moment. And so just quickly going through the agenda, we're going to be talking about, and I just kind of walked you through the history of the People's Budget. So we were founded started doing this work as Black Lives Matter Los Angeles 5 years ago. We also remember that there were organizations doing work before us, and I'll take you through a few of those slides. Baba Akili will talk about the Black LA demands, which all of you received, and I think we only got a response from Councilmember Wesson on those demands. We'll talk about the coalition. Reverend Ray will talk about that. And then soon to be Dr. David Turner will talk about the data. And I know many of you are really interested in the data and how we got that data, the methods that we used. And then Kendrick will talk about reimagining public safety. I'll talk about how many folks are engaged in this work. And then finally, we'll talk about what it is we're asking for. So quickly, the history of the People's Budget. We talked about that for 5 years we've been engaged in this work, but before us, and I think it's here, it'll be here later. Before us, there were organizations like LA CAN, like Community Coalition, like Stop LAPD Spying, who've been doing work around making sure resources get to places that actually keep communities safe, and then talking about how Black people especially experience policing in the city of Los Angeles and why that's not our first choice, or it's not our choice for how we engage in public safety. And so I'm gonna hand it over to Baba Akili, who's gonna talk about the Black LA demands.
All right, thank you. Is this on?
Yeah, turn it around.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Good morning. My name's Keely, and I'm an organizer with Black Lives Matters LA and the director of the Fannie Lou Hamer Institute. I'm going to share with you with the council the Black LA demands in light of COVID-19 and the rate of Black death. These demands were developed and sent to you all back in April. And once again, Councilman Herb Wesson was the only person that responded. These demands are the genesis of and connected to the People's Budget, because Black people are dying at 2/3 the numbers of our population from COVID-19. Many in the Black community felt it was critical because this is a life or death issue and it required immediate attention because we were dying. These demands were developed by a coalition of more than 50 organizations, Black-led organizations, including many of the groups that you all work with, and then focused on long-term, medium, and immediate needs, because we are disproportionately impacted both by this public health crisis and the economic fallout. These demands are based on a divest, invest principle. Divest from a bloated police budget, defund the police, and invest in the people's needs and quality of life spending. We spent many hours discussing, planning, and developing these demands. I want to draw your attention to an immediate demand around public safety. Employ properly equipped non-violent community care workers as neighborhood resources instead of expanding patrols by funding police and law enforcement. funding for neighborhood-based community care plans in Black communities throughout the city, especially South Los Angeles, Watts, and Skid Row. A moratorium on non-violent arrest and dismissal of all non-violent criminal warrants and citations. We felt because these demands grew out of our need and Black people were dying, that if these demands were met and the focus was on Black interests and issues, that all other people would be developed. These 55 demands are based on an understanding that because Black people are suffering the most, our needs must be addressed immediately. And we reject the cuts that the mayor was making to the critical needs that we were advocating for. So at the time that we are dying the most, the budget reflects the least resources in communities that are dying. And so we wanted, that became the centerpiece, and we advanced them in April. We are now in June, and they became the genesis of and connected to what evolved and developed as the people's demand. Because we knew that if Black people were taken care of, everybody else is always going to be taken care of. So that's why it is critical for us to start with the interests, understanding, and concerns of Black people. Thank you.
So we just wanted to lift up that with Black people dying at 2 to 3 times our population share, we advanced this. It was virtually every single Black-led organization in the county of Los Angeles who signed on to these demands. And this was before you received the budget from the mayor. So we were also upset that the mayor didn't respond to or consider these Black LA demands. It's a disrespect to Black Los Angeles. We had everyone sign on to these demands, from the NAACP to the Ethiopian Democratic Club, sign on to the demands, that coalition was pulled together by Black Lives Matter Los Angeles. So no one responded, and then we get this mayor's budget in the midst of a health pandemic with an economic fallout where he's increasing the LAPD budget. So we took to social media. We got the support of a wide-ranging coalition that Reverend Ray is going to talk about. And then we started to advocate. So it's really important to remember that for 5 years, we've been pushing back, but this year in particular, we saw the increase to LAPD's budget as being particularly egregious in the midst of a health pandemic with an economic fallout. As crime is dropping, that you're going to be spending more on LAPD. So we have these initial more than 50 organizations. It's now more than 70 Black-led organizations who signed on to the Black LA demands. And then we kind of moved towards this People's Budget LA after we saw the mayor's release of his budget. We took to social media, and lots of organizations stepped in to support.
My name is Reverend Ray Chen Huang, and I'm an organizer with LA Voice, a Presbyterian pastor, and also a member of the Healthy LA Coalition, which is a group of 320, a network of 320 organizations across the county. When the pandemic started in March, LA Voice and other organizations and coalitions in the city were really concerned about the impact that the pandemic would have in our communities. But in particular, we were most concerned about our Black communities, knowing that it's been on the backs of our Black folk that they continue to be the bottom of the rung. They continue to be left out. They continue to be under-resourced, continue to be left in chains at the end of every day and every week. And so the community gathered, and organizations across the county, across the city came together, and we heard about the Black leaders' demands. And we said, we support and we strongly stand with you. And so we were reached out, and because of the People's Budget LA being formed, they said, there's an opportunity here. The mayor's budget does not reflect any of our demands in this time. This is ridiculous. Before the pandemic, Black communities were already struggling with the kind of racist policies that we've been having for decades. And now here, after the pandemic, we are going to be far, far worse. This is ridiculous. And so we gathered and we joined and we said we have to do something about this. And so we gathered and got on that phone call on May 13th, I believe it was. And we said, what can we do about this? And that was when the coalition began and the research began. And we started going to all of our organizations and started to talk about what needed to be done, what we needed, what was required for our people to survive, to actually live, to have the freedom of being in this country without being in chains. And so those organizations are the LA CAN, the Los Angeles Community Action Network, White People for Black Lives, K-Town for All, Sunrise Organization. I'm having trouble reading it from here. Youth Justice Coalition, Ground Game Los Angeles. Oh, thank you. People's City Council, Trans Latina Coalition, the Stop LAPD Spying, Students Deserve, Street Watch LA, LA Defensa, LA Voice, which I'm proudly a part of, COCO, Vibe, Labor Community Strategy Center, Crenshaw Subway Coalition, Bend the Arc Jewish Action, March for Our Lives, Latu West Side, and the Africa Town Coalition. We all stand strongly together with the People's Budget LA. And I just want you all to know, these are not the organizations who stand solidly in solidarity with People's Budget LA. These are just the most active ones. On a daily basis, I, as a member of LA Voice, get regular phone calls because of our work with People's Budget LA, get phone calls and emails saying, what do we need to do? How can we help? We stand with People's Budget LA and we stand with Black Lives Matter in this moment. Thousands, and you've seen them on the streets, stand squarely alongside in solidarity with this moment.
So again, folks, thank you for having me. And thank you again to Black Lives Matter for the work that BLM continuously does, not only to open doors like this, but to be the moral compass for what our city is. So excited to talk to you about the People's Budget, and excited to talk to you not only about some of our findings, but also about what it is, right, that people in Los Angeles want to see. So before I dive into methods, before I dive into how we collected our data and the type of data that we collected, I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge some of our partners and some of the folks who also conducted similar surveys prior to this, as well as some of the advocacy work that had taken place right around budget work here in Los Angeles, specifically when we talk about law enforcement. Again, Black Lives Matter has been challenging the spending of law enforcement since 2015. And I want to make sure to make this public, and I wanted to paint this picture for you all right before we dive too deeply. When we walked in here, we were greeted by law enforcement. Law enforcement brought us to the back room. In addition to that, law enforcement also took our temperatures, right? These are things that, you know, we would typically ask healthcare professionals to do, or all of you have staff, right? Staff members would do, right? But again, you know, when we have this disproportionate rate of spending with law enforcement, that's one of the things that happens, is they get tasked to do things that, quite frankly, they shouldn't be doing, right? In addition to that, right, these organizations that you see on the screen in 2011, the Youth Justice Coalition did a survey of 2,600 folks, right? And they found that people wanted increased investment in youth development. People wanted increased investment in youth jobs, right? In 2017, Community Coalition did a people's poll where they surveyed over 4,000 people. And again, more people wanted increased investment in jobs, increased investment in resources, right? The coalition that, again, my day job, that I manage is the Brother Son Selves Coalition, which is a coalition of 9 organizations that do organize and work with boys and men of color in LA. And we surveyed 3,300 young people. And again, people wanted investment in jobs. People wanted investment in resources. People wanted investment in mental health, right? So if we keep saying the same things again and again, right, how many people is it going to take to get the message? So let's go there and let's figure out how many. So because of this organizing work, right, the People's Budget Coalition distributed the survey amongst their networks using a survey software called Qualtrics. Qualtrics is a specialized survey software where you're able to collect the data rapidly. You distribute it through a random link, through a text message, or from a website, and people can then take the survey either on their cell phones or on their computers, depending on how they got the link. Now, there were 33,000 people tried to take the survey, but there was a filter in the survey that only allowed residents in the city of Los Angeles to take it. And that's the 24,426 responses that we got. So just to let you know, people are eager and willing, right, to engage in these conversations. Over 50 organizations helped to distribute this survey. And in addition to that, 3,300 people participated in the town hall, right, to further discuss what it is that the city of Los Angeles should be doing and how it should prioritize its money. So I'll let you know that a lot of people have done a lot more with a lot less data, right? To give you an example, at the end of 2016, right, with the presidential election, CNN surveyed 24,588 people. We surveyed 24,426, and that's local. That's people from here. That's people who have a say, who should have a say in what it is that their money, or what it is that their city spends money on. So I just wanted to go ahead and paint this picture for you, right, to figure out not only how the people can participate in budgeting, but also how they participate in larger public discourse. So we wanted to make sure that we got critical segments of the population, right, that we paid attention to race, that we paid attention to gender, that we paid attention to whether or not people were essential workers or whether or not people have been impacted by incarceration, right? So how does this 24,000 folks break down, right? So we had about 55% people of color take our survey. In our survey, we had just under 3,000 people who are experiencing housing insecurity, 6,700 people who are currently experiencing financial insecurity, and 3,000 people who are essential workers. In addition to that, nearly a third of people who took this survey are unemployed. The majority of them are unemployed because of COVID. Nearly a third of folks identify as LGBTQ, and over 2/3 of the people who took our survey identified as female or cisgender women. Now, when we start breaking things down by the LA City Council districts, right, these are the numbers of people. Some of these districts are yours, right? And these are people oftentimes who are the most highest propensity voters, right? So understand that we are not just surveying random folks. These are your actual constituents who are saying these things, who are saying what it is they want to invest in. Then here's a list of the top zip codes. And now we're going to start diving into the findings. So overwhelmingly, the call was that we wanted to invest in universal needs and divest in traditional forms of policing. To give you an example of what this looks like, 45% of people wanted to invest money in things that we call universal aid and crisis management. 27% of folks wanted to invest in things for the built environment, right? So investing in our roads, investing in our parks, investing in the things that we know keep our city lively and functioning. And finally, 25% of people wanted to invest in reimagined community safety. So instead of us, when we first walked in the room, being greeted by law enforcement, what would it look like if we were greeted by other folks? What would it look like if we were greeted by community care workers? What would it look like if we were greeted or we had our temperatures taken, right, by people who were health workers for the city? Not people with guns who could take my life. And then when we asked people if they wanted to invest in law enforcement, 1.6% of the people who took our survey said we need to make sure that we put money into law enforcement. Now, I want to make a distinction here that when we first distributed this survey was before George Floyd, that weekend before. And then as people kept taking the data, who were inspired by this particular moment, right, what happened? We started to have broader conversations about what it is public safety is and what it is public safety could be. And we know, right, not only from that video we saw, but the thousands of other people who have been killed by law enforcement, that there is a different version of public safety available, which led to this 1.6% number. And I want to be clear that this is the voices of 24,000 people who are in the city of Los Angeles who took this survey. And as the administrator on this particular survey, we get surveys every day. This is the data as of Friday. This doesn't even include this weekend. Just to make sure that we have an understanding of how many people are engaging in this process. Now, when we say universal aid, when we say built environment, when we say reimagined community safety, when we say law enforcement and policing, what are we talking about? What is that? Right? So we defined it and wanted to make sure that we provided, a quick breakdown of some of these things, right? So when we talk about universal aid and crisis management, right, we're talking about the city having its own fund to discuss emergency preparedness, right? So when we have situations like COVID, we should be financially ready for them. It shouldn't be something that comes out of the blue, right? We should be talking about food security, right? There were a number of people in the city of Los Angeles, right, who couldn't afford to eat, who couldn't afford, right, to make sure that they could feed their families. And they had to make decisions between rent and whether or not they were going to eat that month. Now, I know the city council, that other folks have done things around moratoriums on evictions, right? But I'll tell you right now that when we're talking about the people and their financial security, that's something that the city should be invested in, because when you have people who are financially secure, you have a city that's financially secure. In addition to that, we surveyed folks around reimagined community safety. So we talked about this as investing in restorative justice methods, right? We talked about this as investing in community care workers, as investing in community investment and neighborhood empowerment, right? What would it look like to empower our neighborhoods and communities? We also talked about what it is to invest in mental health and wellness, right? Especially now that people are socially distant, especially now, right, that we're not allowed to be close together as we normally are. We initially were told that we couldn't sit 5 at this table, and that was stressful. Imagine, right? People who rode together, who walked in together, can't even sit together to address this particular council. Again, stress. And then finally, when we start talking about the built environment, public works, public transportation, investing in libraries, investing in the things that we know, right, help to keep a community whole, help keep a community safe. Now, we also ask people about, are there any areas that we shouldn't be investing in? Are there any areas that we should take money from? And that's what the graph looks like. Virtually no one wanted to take money away from the things that we know are positive. Public health, safety, child and youth development. Now, my question to you all is, how is it that this is what the people want to invest in, and then this is what the people don't want to invest in, yet these are the things that get cut first, while law enforcement, policing, those budgets continue to inflate? How is it that our budgets do not match the will of the people? So, as we're talking about, right, what it is that the people need, just want to make sure that we drive this point home. Universal aid and crisis management. What would it look like if LA was prepared for this particular crisis? What would it look like if instead of law enforcement shooting people with rubber bullets and tanks, we used some of that money, right, and we used it to invest in the protective equipment for our city workers and the protective equipment of the essential workers who are on the front line? What would it look like if we had that type of infrastructure already in place? What would it look like if we had the infrastructure, right, to support those who were the most vulnerable? We know that we can support people who are homeless, right? It just wasn't any political will. Well, now is the time to be bold. In addition to that, right, talking about built environment, right? So again, I grew up right around the Crenshaw area, right, off Florence and Crenshaw. It is a struggle. All parts, right, especially where there are disproportionate amounts of Black people, right, you don't see the same type of infrastructure that you see in other parts of the city. One of my good friends, Justin Marks, he used to say this thing, that when he worked in the city of Inglewood, it didn't necessarily feel safe, but there were a lot of police around. But when he started working in the Wilshire area, there weren't a lot of police around, but it felt safer. And he would say that police don't make communities feel safe, resources do. So what does it look like for us to have the resources and the built environment that reflect that we care about that community? Again, we're welcoming and we're inviting City Council to imagine what this looks like with us and to invest in that. And then finally, reimagine community safety. I'll say this right before I close. My mother and my father, right, of course, struggled. They struggled like a lot of parents struggle with domestic violence, with trauma, with harm, things that oftentimes were very challenging with growing up. And a lot of times the police got involved. My mother and my father, the police never helped the situation. It escalated the situation. Somebody always went to jail. Somebody always was locked up. Either it was my mom for being an aggressor, or either it was my dad for being an aggressor. And because of that, right, it broke my family apart, and neither one of my parents are alive today because of the stress that they experienced, because we weren't able to work out our issues, and because we don't invest, right, in family therapy, we don't invest in restorative justice. What would it look like if instead of, police officers coming to take my dad away, right, or police officers coming to criminalize my mother, right, for her mental health issues, what would it look like, right, if we had mental health workers who came to support that? What would it look like if we had people who cared about the community to do restorative justice work, to heal the harm? I'm blessed to be sitting in front of you a year away from getting my PhD. But there are a lot of people who grew up in a very similar situation that I did, who are not here because of that same trauma, because of those same issues. But you all have the power and the ability to make a new Los Angeles, to make a new Los Angeles that protects little Black boys like I was, protects little Black girls like my sister. So again, our top priorities for investment are housing security, our mental health and wellness, our public health and healthcare. We want you all to invest in a healthy city, to invest in a healthy Los Angeles, and you have the power to do that. And we know that we spend way too much money on law enforcement. Again, as a nonprofit professional, right, one of the things that they tell us is that when your budget gets to $2 million, your organization has now reached sustainability. You want to know what else is a line item for $2 million? How much money the LAPD spends on printers. On printers. That's how much money they spend on printers and ink. And you mean to tell me that's the same budget that can have an organization like the Social Justice Learning Institute, like Inner City Struggle, like some of these other organizations that get acknowledged for doing great work, right? You mean to tell me that that's the same budget that they have to hire staff and to go out there and do good in the community? When we say that we need divestment, right? We're saying that we need divestment and we're saying that we need investment because we know that there are people, that there are organizations, that there is an infrastructure out there that needs to be supported in order for us to fundamentally transform what the city looks and feels like for everybody. So with that being said, I just want to make sure, right, that you all saw this data. Again, I want to thank my comrades with Black Lives Matter Los Angeles, with Build Power, with the People's Budget Coalition, and I'm excited, right, to have this conversation because I think now is the time, right, for change. If you ever wanted to know, if you ever wanted to feel what it would feel like to be an elected official during the civil rights movement, now is your opportunity, right, to do the right thing and to be on the side of justice. Thank you.
I'm not good at technology, but I just pressed this little button. Okay, cool. My name is Kendrick Sampson. I get paid to tell stories, to play characters, to imagine differently, and to affect other people's imagination. I co-founded an organization or a nonprofit initiative called Build Power to help organize Hollywood around these issues. And, you know, one thing I just kind of want to open up with is, to be real frank, we have a really low bar with policing in terms of imagining differently for public safety. And we can imagine differently. I think, you know, I don't think it's that hard, to be completely honest, but I would like to offer up, if anybody needs help, there's a whole industry here of people who imagine and get paid to imagine, you know, and we can help. We will offer that help up. And just on a personal note, you know, 2 weeks ago, was in the streets. We co-organized, led by Black Lives Matter Los Angeles, but co-organized with Build Power demonstration, a peaceful demonstration in Pan Pacific Park. And we marched to 3rd and Fairfax. We closed out. We had an amazing, amazing, powerful time. A beautiful, beautiful display of love and care for our communities and uplifting those who've been murdered by police, those families, letting them grieve and heal around community, a broad community, thousands of people. And it was beautiful. It was one of the most beautiful experiences that I've ever been a part of. As I was going home and I started looking for my staff, who I am worried about now because of the trauma that they've experienced, the demonstration was met with violence from LAPD. And can't explain why to this day. I am still healing. If you could see these wounds, they took off layers of skin. Just a couple of days ago, I was finally to get the hanging skin off of my leg. I was shot 7 times with rubber bullets. I have a permanent scar here on my chest. I have 5 on my leg, 1 on my arm. I was beat with batons, jumped by police. So was my assistant, who came and tried to pull me away. He was beat and had to go to the hospital and get stitches in his leg because you could see the bone where they cracked his shin open. My buddy Dion has 2 fractured bones in his skull right now. And he had skin, a flap of skin hanging from his face from being shot by rubber bullets. This was at a beautiful, One of the most beautiful moments I've ever had in my life, one of the most healing moments, only to be traumatized. So I have a particular disdain and trauma for being met by police to be escorted here. It didn't have to be done into the chambers. I didn't have to be, have a police officer, an armed police officer, take my temperature. A health professional. We need healing right now. Thousands of people out there were brutalized by police officers. We have COVID-19 right now that is disproportionately affecting Black folks. And what we need more than ever, as people are social distancing and not able to be in community physically as much as they can, we need healing, and we need to invest in healing, which is why so many people were outraged at the increase that was proposed during COVID for police officers. Doesn't make any sense. Crime was down. Crime has been on a steady decline for years, but police budgets keep going up nationwide. Los Angeles leads the country in imagining, leads the world really, because we have Hollywood here. We need to transfer that imagination to how we think about public safety. We can have better, we can build better. And there's support from millions of people right now all over the world. And we should be leading that charge, because that's what so many people get paid to do here, is imagine. That imagination is used to heal, and it can be used to hurt. As Future often says, Janaea Khan, somebody imagined shackles on Black people. Somebody imagined colonizing this land and killing off the people that were here, the indigenous folks that were here. Let's imagine differently. Let's imagine better. Let's build better. We want to make sure that we're building up communities. That's what reimagining public safety is about. We know that public safety is not policing. I love to say, if policing kept us safe, you got tons of police in the hood, right? Fortune 500 CEOs would be lined up waiting for spots in the hood, right? And they're not, because it doesn't keep you safe. What keeps us safe? We know what keeps us safe. Jobs, shelter, housing, education, healthcare. We have been in a mental health crisis in this country for a very long time. We haven't ever prioritized mental health in this country. Healing. And this country has a lot of healing to do. We have a lot of healing. We deserve healing. Black and indigenous and brown folk in this country need healing, deserve healing, but instead are met by more trauma by these systems. And policing is not the only violent system. The way that we go about having, capitalism run healthcare, the way that we go about extracting, I want to be very clear. Elected officials choosing, I hope that this perspective lands. Elected officials choosing to invest in oppression and more trauma for our communities, as opposed to what they know they need, is actually violent. That is violence. It doesn't look like violence. We're not taught that it's violence, but that is literally extracting resources from what we know we need that we know is causing people hurt, harm, and trauma, physical, mental, spiritual trauma, and investing it in systems that create more trauma. We have a responsibility to do differently. And we have to invest in prevention, okay? Not just reaction. Okay, so when you think about, like, when I was in school, right? We had problems. A kid brought a knife to school one time and was trying to stab another kid. One of my dear who I used to call my sister was shot and killed in high school at a party. There were fights, many fights in high school, because that's what kids do. Police didn't ever save us from any of those situations. They didn't ever help any of those situations. They targeted the Black and brown kids at our school. The discipline was disproportionate. And they came in and pepper sprayed kids when they fought. You know what my mom did when me and my brother fought? Pulled us off of each other. And it was done. Because we were children. We don't need police in our schools. The person who intervened from the kid stabbing another kid was a teacher. A teacher. I haven't heard of police helping any of these school shootings. As a matter of fact, on one of them, I believe the one in Florida, one ran away. So why do we have, I really want, y'all, I'm not going to answer this question for you because I know we know the answer, but why do we have armed officers in our schools? I experienced police brutality growing up in high school. I was pulled out of my mom's car at gunpoint and accused of stealing it. I was told that he would shoot me if I tried to run. He was going to bust my kneecaps if I even moved. I was 16. You think I went back to school and wanted to see police officers? There was nothing ever that officers did to keep us safe. Teachers kept us safe. We could have used some more counselors. We could have used some more nurses. There's schools here that don't have nurses, don't have adequate counseling. I mean, near adequate counseling. They don't have the bare minimum for counseling. We need therapy in our schools. There's so many kids that experience trauma in our communities, and we have no therapy. We don't need police at universities. We don't need police in recreation parks. We don't need police in housing developments. We don't need police on Hollywood sets. Why do we have them at events? There's so many other forms of more effective security. We don't need them. We don't. Health problems should never be handled by police officers. They shouldn't be taking nobody's temperature. They shouldn't be taking anybody's temperature. They shouldn't be handling mental health crises. You are 16 times more likely to be killed by police officers if you are experiencing a mental health episode. In our prisons and jails, 55% of men have mental health issues. 73% of women, which highlights the extra layer of oppression that women face. And we know that our prisons and jails and killings by police officers are disproportionately Black. That's not a coincidence. That's what these systems were built to do. We need to build new systems, and we can. We can have violence intervention programs that are community-based. They've been proven way more effective all over the country. Rehabilitation centers instead of criminalizing people who have health issues, addiction. Unarmed, nonviolent, non-law enforcement first responders from the community care workers. This can create economy in our communities. You can give jobs to folks from the community, and people trust them better, and they have more know-how, right? They know the community, they have more relationships. It doesn't have what we see so often is we're talking about community policing and like putting people in our communities that don't know the community to get to know the community over time, and all. It don't make no sense. It doesn't work. It's been proven ineffective, but there are people in the community that people trust and respect that can just show up. I know y'all have known some of these people that just show up and everybody stops arguing. Those people need to be employed to do just that. Show up and be trusted and affect change. You have community-based emergency response teams that can respond to violence in the community. They know who these people are. They know what the cause is, and they can more often prevent it if that's their job. Otherwise, people are volunteering to do this, and it really ain't got the time. They're going to do it anyway, but let me tell you, like Melina said, organizing ain't paid. And my God, is it hard? It should be the highest paid people in the country, organizers, community organizers, but it's mostly volunteer work, and that is super stressful. And we could provide therapy to them too, free of charge, please. Alternatives to incarceration, restorative justice programs, after school programs, counselors and nurses in our schools. There's so many ways that we can think about it, but it's gonna take you guys to partner with people, to do whatever you have to do to imagine differently. And I believe that we can, and I know that I know everybody feels it here, whether you want to deny it or not. We are at a historic tipping point right now in the world, and especially in America. We can feel it every single time we go outside because we haven't been allowed to go outside that often, right? We can feel it when we watch the news. We can feel it when we're on the phone with people. It feels different. And we can't go back to the world we knew before COVID. There is a higher unemployment rate than ever. We are with an unprecedented health crisis, mental health crisis, economic crisis, and we cannot go back to what we knew. We can't. So what are we going to do differently? What world are we going to build? Valerie Kaur always talks about maybe this isn't the darkness of the tomb, but the darkness of the womb. What are we going to birth out of this situation, out of this darkness? What are we going to utilize the trauma and everything that people are experiencing and the motivation to birth something new? In church, I say this often because it's one of my favorite. In church, they talk about a bad seed produces a bad tree, produces bad fruit. A good seed produces a good tree, produces good fruit. I have to say policing is a bad seed. It's a bad seed. The history of it is very clear. And it hasn't ever represented healing, peace, or accountability in our communities. Only trauma. And it's only going to increase, especially after thousands of people who took to their right, their right to protest, were brutalized in the streets. Their reputation has been exposed. It's always been there, but now it's been exposed on a national scale. Thousands of people saw us getting beat and shot with rubber bullets directly. aiming for people's heads and chests and bodies, taking off layers of skin, breaking bones. They can't regain that reputation. So what are we going to do differently? I didn't go on these slides, but investing in well-being, preventing crises, diversifying first response are the three categories. I think I covered them all. But I really want to implore that we do differently. There are so many children here that are going to remember what happened in this crisis and how our leaders chose to act, how our elected officials chose to act and be different and do different. And we need liberation, and you all can be liberators. Whatever you choose to do is on you. I can't tell you what to do. Well, I can. I just did. But that is my suggestion. All right, back to Doc.
Thank you. So we just want to lift up again what we said at the beginning, that there are 7 of us in this room, but we represent tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of folks, right? So people all around the country are coming and saying, what is People's Budget LA? They're looking at this data that David has led us in collecting. They're asking, how can we engage in similar processes? And you see movements growing. So we just want to underscore the audience reach of this campaign. And really, it's not an audience, it's a community reach, right? We want to be very clear. So we've talked about the number of folks who've taken the survey, but beyond the number of folks who've taken the survey are people around the globe engaging in the data. So this data was collected in 30 days. So when David talks about 24,000 people took the survey, that's in 30 days. I know some of you all are trying to collect your own data. You are not allowed, you're not, that's not normal for people to be engaging in this way. It's because they care about this issue. They see it as the issue of this generation. And so on our page, on our website, we have 195,000 unique visitors to the website. Website views in the last 30 days, it's only been up 30 days, 442,000 folks. Average visits per day, people are coming to our website at 11.4 thousand per day. It's global, and it's really important to think about that, especially as you think about how does that compare to what you all experience. We've actually driven people to your website because we encourage people to participate in city council meetings, in budget committee meetings. So the work that we're doing is also work of civic engagement, right? You all also know that People's Budget LA has been trending on social media ever since we've started using that hashtag. Just last week, we trended #1 for 3 hours in the entire country, not in Los Angeles, not in California, but the entire country. We trended #1. People care about this issue. So this is not about our social media reach as much as remembering that social media reach is also a reflection of what people care about, right? It's really important to also remember that people are searching for People's Budget LA at the same rates that they're searching for city council or the mayor, right? And we're actually driving people to do searches of you all, right? So here's the closing point. That this is the overwhelming demand of the people globally, of people nationally, and of Angelenos in particular. What we are demanding, what Angelenos are demanding, is that we be courageous in this moment. I heard so many of you when George Floyd was killed way over in Minneapolis speak his name. But have you spoken the names of Riddell Jones or Eric Rivera or Anthony Vargas, or the 609 people who've been killed by law enforcement in LA County just in the last 7 years? Have you been willing to lift up the name of 14-year-old Jesse Romero, who should have been greeted by somebody who was a community worker and asked if he had a marker, why are you tagging, right? not shot while he had his hands up as a 14-year-old boy who hadn't even made it to high school yet. We need to think about, and sometimes I was gonna apologize for becoming emotional, but I'm not, because I'm a mother and you're a mother, and we all have children that we are trying to make this world better for. We're all connected to each other. We have an opportunity in this moment. You have an opportunity to be courageous, to not think about the political calculations and what will the LA Police Protective League do if I say I'm cutting their budget. This should not be about your own political ambitions. This should be about what kind of world do you want to make. The world is speaking right now. They're saying we don't want a system of policing that puts targets on the backs of Black people especially, but also is a regular assailant and traumatizer of our entire community. You have an opportunity now to not just say, who am I as a city council member, but whose are you? Do you belong to the Police Protective League? Do you belong to your ambitions? Do you belong to your ego, or do you belong to the people? We're challenging you to say you belong to the people, to do something courageous. And we see examples all around this country of people doing things that are courageous. In Minneapolis, in Denver, up in Oakland, in San Francisco, you're seeing policymakers say, you know what, we're not just going to cut $100 million or $150 million, which amounts to the proposed increase, right? They're saying, you know what, we want to end our relationship with policing. Los Angeles Housing Services is talking about severing ties with the police department, right? You have an opportunity right now to say we're going to do things that are courageous. In Minneapolis, they are disbanding Minneapolis Police Department. And we want to be very clear that as you take courageous steps, that you stay grounded with community. And remember that community is saying we want public safety, but as Kendrick said, we can reimagine it. And I'm going to be quiet after I tell a quick story. When I first moved to Los Angeles a little more than 20 years ago, I went to graduate school at USC. That's what brought me here. I came here when I was 21. And the second place that I lived was in Leimert Park. And I lived in this unit on Degnan, close to Audubon Middle School. And something strange would happen every morning at about 7 o'clock. All the old folks would go out and sit on their porches. And I watched this happen for about a month, and I was friends with the people who lived in my building. And I asked Miss Gordon, who lived in the building, in the unit in front of me, because she was one of the older folks who sat on the porch. She'd come out in her house coat with her coffee mug, and they'd sit out there, and sometimes they'd talk back and forth to each other. And I said, Miss Gordon, why do y'all come outside every morning? And she said, oh, we're watching the babies go to school. And they would sit outside and watch the babies go to Audubon. And there were never any fights. Sometimes they would pull some kids and go, stop cussing, I'm gonna tell your mama, right? But that was public safety. It was beautiful. It was the building of community, right? It was the way that I knew that I didn't have to worry about being a young single woman living in a unit that was pretty accessible. Somebody could have easily gotten into my door, but Miss Gordon was looking out for me, you know? And so it's really important that we understand that as we're saying, and we are saying, defund the police, we're also saying reimagine public safety. And so we're asking you to step into your highest selves in this critical moment. This is a moment when the whole world has cracked open. Don't be weak. Don't say this is what is. Imagine what can be. And so we're asking you to do that because we're also making ourselves do that. This is Hollywood Boulevard last Sunday. There were over 100,000 people out on Hollywood Boulevard. There are tens of thousands of people every single Wednesday right down the street from where you are. You're welcome to join us, right? Last night on an organizing meeting, not a protest, we had to turn people away. We had over 700 people fill a church for a Black Lives Matter organizing, just a general meeting to talk about what it means to defund the police. Every day there are people filling the streets and putting their bodies on the line, but also saying, you know what, I'm going to reject respectability politics. I'm going to step into my highest self. I'm going to look at my children, but also hear the voices of those who walked before me. And I'm going to be courageous. That's what we're asking you to do, to be courageous, defund the police, and reimagine public safety. You have the ability to do it. Let's let Los Angeles lead this charge. So that's it for our presentation, but we're happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. I don't think the people's budget is very complicated. I think for those of us who grew up in these neighborhoods, who know what this looks like firsthand, who have actual lived experiences in some of our neighborhoods and why we got into these careers, honestly, as up and coming organizers when we were kids, fighting back certain systems, pushing back on what we thought was unfair and racist growing up, and still dealing with so much of that in our respective districts, which is where I call home, where I choose to raise my family. So I know why I got into this, into politics, to try to change it from inside. And so when you talk about, being a mom, yeah, I'm here because I am a mom. And I'm here because I've been trying to reimagine Los Angeles in my neighborhood for 47 years. And so it's not complicated. This is not that difficult to do. I think the challenges for some of us is trying to work with other entities to do their fair share as well. I'm very, very concerned about the LAHSA numbers that were just released last week, where our homeless population continues to grow, disproportionately people of color living on the streets. And I grow more and more concerned with the fact that the city of Los Angeles has a duty to build shelter, but the services are what's missing. It's like, how do we reimagine Los Angeles, but how do we reimagine LA County and working with our partners whose duty is to provide those services for our unsheltered communities? What does that look like? Do we have to get sued continuously for us to be able to show up with actual dollars to pay for those services? Apparently so, because we're in the middle of another lawsuit. And 17 years of lawsuit has only led to 60,000 people living on the streets. That doesn't help. I think all of us are challenged with the fact that there is certain things we can do. It's not an excuse, but everyone needs to do their fair share and make sure that they show up, not only for Angelenos, but for people who live in the county of LA. So for me, I am committed to continuing to reimagine what my neighborhoods look like, what I want from my kid when she becomes a mom. And when I took the responsibilities of leading this council, I led with the first thing that is the most comfort for me growing up, and that's family. And for me, reimagining Los Angeles is putting families first. What does it look like for a single mom who's in a motel that we can't seem to find permanent supporting housing for her and her children? What does it look like for that mom every 30 days to have to move to a different motel and her child needs to move to a different school? What does that look like for a child who's been moving from motel to motel because we can't seem to figure out how to permanently house her and her children? Motels are not conducive to raising kids, especially if they're plagued with human trafficking issues and drug issues and other stuff going on in the neighborhood. So to me, reimagining Los Angeles starts with families and with children. And we need to make sure that our budget reflects that. So as a one vote on the city council, I'm very much committed to figuring out what that looks like, because what currently is not working. And you're absolutely right, Kendrick. I think the trauma, the mistrust needs to be dealt with. So I just want to thank you for being here. I hope this was helpful. It certainly was helpful for me. I don't want to take up too much time because I know Mr. Krikorian wants to say a few words as well. But it's not complicated. It's not rocket science. This is exactly how you reimagine neighborhoods. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Madam President, and thank you all very much for, I think, a very positive presentation that talks about a lot of areas that many of us who are sitting here with you today are already pretty passionate about. And maybe we need to even be more creative, as you mentioned, Kendrick, maybe rethinking some of the assumptions that we have always fallen back on. Because when it comes to, for example, economic development, especially in underserved communities, this is one of the areas that Mr. Price and I have spent a considerable amount of our time and energy focusing on, but clearly there haven't been enough resources devoted to that, and we need to do better. We need to do more. When it comes to things that uplift families, like childcare and early childhood development and some of those sorts of things. These are areas that Ms. Martinez and I have focused a considerable amount of our time and energy on. Clearly, much, much more needs to be done. When it comes to housing our homelessness, obviously it's the crisis of a lifetime, of a generation, and it's something that everybody in the world sees. Mr. O'Farrell has devoted virtually, every waking hour to trying to address that, and all of us have as well. But he's led this effort to try to go to other agencies of government, like our state government and our federal government, to try to wake them up as well, because we have our areas of jurisdiction and our areas of resources that are available, but it's a small slice of the larger pie. And I think it's one of the things that I'm excited about seeing over the last few weeks of national organizing that you all and others have led, is that this is a time of, it's an inflection point for Los Angeles, to be sure. I think it's a national time of reconsideration of priorities and reconsideration of where we need to invest. And we need the support, as Ms. Martinez said, on mental health. We need our county friends to stand up and support this, because this is maybe for me, the single biggest piece of social services that is absolutely missing, that touches on every single thing you talked about, whether it's police community interactions, whether it's education, healthcare, housing issues, and homelessness. All of that has been driven in the wrong direction for the last 40 years because of our country's failure to invest in mental health care, failure to take it seriously, to provide mental health care as something that will lift us all up. We need, as a country, to do one heck of a lot more there. There's many of other issues that we've talked about today that I want to tell you I'm eager to work with you on, not just over the next couple of weeks while we're responding to the mayor's budget, but on an ongoing basis. And that's why I think it's so important that we had some of our policy experts here as well, because, and there will be more, I think. There will be more opportunity to interact with other policy area chairs. We need this to be a discussion not just about this budget, but the reimagining part that you talked about, which goes beyond just the dollars and cents to not only how much are we going to spend, but how are we going to spend it? Where is it going to be invested? And we just haven't done as good a job as we need to have done, especially in that area of investing. And I think many, as I say, this is a first opportunity, and I'm so sorry that I'm looking at the clock because we have budget and finance to start shortly, but I want this to be a first conversation, not the one and only conversation that we're going to have, not just over the course of the next few weeks, but an ongoing basis with all of us. I don't see how we can take advantage of this moment in history if we don't do exactly that. So I want to thank you for taking the time to come down and share this with us, and look forward to the continuing conversation.
Because we have been here before. This country has been here before. It was here when Emmett Till died. It was here then. And so now we are here at this moment, and you have shared your positions, and they line up. The question now becomes, what will you do? And I appreciate your sentiment. I do. I really do. And one of the advantages I have, I'm usually the oldest person in the room. And today I am. And I'm going to use that privilege to ask you all to make a commitment, not to words, because you're good at that, to make a commitment to action. I'm going to ask you to invest in, first, the reimagining, starting with reimagining a society that doesn't focus on the culture of fear and punishment.
Mm-hmm.
Start there. And the budget reflects that. The budget reflects that. And so we appreciate your words. I'm looking for a word that says, yes, brother, I'm going to do this. Yes, we're going to do this. I appreciate your sentiment, but what I'm looking for is a commitment. One of the things that I have decided at this stage at 72 is that I don't want to necessarily be in conversation for conversation's sake. I'd like to negotiate with y'all. I'd like to put some things on the table, and let's go back and forth. Let's resolve this. If you believe this, let's resolve this. If you're committed to this, let's resolve this. If you think what you just said and heard here is meaningful, then let's resolve this. Let's move forward with a commitment. And so I'm asking you now, as the president, the former president, a commitment to reimagining and to defunding the police.
Well, let me just say this first, even though Akila, you got me tingling inside, but you do that with some regularity. This presentation was unbelievably good. It was smooth. It was to the point. It was tight, and I'm very proud. Now, we all know that every layer of government has to play a role. But like I tell these guys all the time, and they're probably sick of hearing it, but I do want to say it to you. I believe that the winds in this country blow from the west to the east. And I do believe that everybody looks to us. So my pledge to you is to try to help LA do its part. I want people in other cities to look at us and see that we are creatively reimagining and doing things. So I'm excited about the future. I'm always available to go back and forth with various ideas. And just in the presentation today, I have several that I'll be chatting with leadership about. And I think that will be a good step in the right direction. But I won't personally, I'm not going to miss this moment. You know, the world is looking at us, and I do want to not be part of history. I want to make it. And you only have opportunities to do that a few times. I believe in this council. I believe in its leadership. I believe we will do some things that will make you proud. So let's rock them and sock them. I'm ready.
So will you commit?
I just did.
That's one commitment. All of you are committing, I take it.
I'm sorry, Mr. Curry, Mr. Price.
Yeah, Mr. Curran.
Yes, you can just call me Curran. As I said, I was excited when you came. I'm even more excited, even more hopeful now. Yes, Keely, as the second oldest man in this room, I accept that challenge. I accept that challenge to make sure we're doing all we can to reimagine what we're doing and to reimagine the output. Like you say, we've heard the talk, from the student demonstrations in the 60s to the anti-war to the 65 uprising, 92. Right, we've heard I mentioned in council a couple weeks ago, we've had these teachable moments before, but now it's the time to action. And so I'm excited about the presentation that was laid out. A little disappointed that more of my constituents did not participate. We had a low number, some 300. But I know that their thoughts and their feelings are certainly consistent with the findings that were made throughout our city. People want change, and they want to see it now, and they want to be able to make sure their families can see it. The community I represent, is about a third under the age of 18. So I'm always focusing on education, parks, open space, opportunities for our young folks, so that they are laying the foundation. As chair of economic development, sensitive to jobs, certainly for our youth, training, internships during the summer, and I hope we'll be able to expand that in ways we have never done before, but also working with our adults and making sure we're doing the kinds of placements that are important, not just for those who are unemployed because they got training, they can't find a job, but those who need to be trained, those who are formerly incarcerated, those veterans, a whole range. We've got to find ways to bring them into the system directly and indirectly. And so I'm excited about being able to work in a collaborative way to do that. This is an exciting time, as all my colleagues have suggested. And we realize that this is a point in history that we have a chance to not just say the right things, but do the right things and do it in ways that we haven't before. So I'm excited. I did have just one quick question, though, Lena, I think you mentioned it early on, about the notion of participatory budgetary process. Talk to us a little bit about where that's been effective in some other cities and how we can learn from those experiences.
Sure. So the best example I would give is what's happening in Jackson, Mississippi under Mayor Chokwe Lumumba. So every year, he's only been in office 2 years, but every year he's convened a People's Assembly. They talk about the budget. They engage in a day-long or in sometimes multi-day process where they talk about where they want those dollars to go. That could be something that you all could do. There's lots of literature on participatory budgeting. I'm happy to talk with you about it. We engaged in an online participatory budgeting process that helped with this data. And so this is something that you all can easily do and get the input of the people. I think it's important that when you do participatory budgeting, though, that you don't just listen, it's not just an exercise, right? That the people who are investing their time and energy feel like that actually is manifested in your budget priorities. So we want to be very clear that the people who engaged with us you're going to be tapped and asked, oh, well, we can reform the police, or maybe the police who are taking temperatures don't have to wear a gun. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about transforming public safety, reimagining and implementing that reimagined public safety. So it's important as you engage with your constituents that that actually translates into policy and into the budget itself.
Well, I think we're getting the message loud and clear. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Just stay informed. And Herb and I thought of putting together the COVID ad hoc committee that we currently sit on. And that is to reimagine how that care money is going to be reinvested in communities of color. That's just the way we put it together. We talk about it because it's our communities who are being impacted disproportionately to any other community. So there is a commitment there. There's our motion that's going to be heard in budget committee in a couple of hours, in about an hour and a half. So I know we need to get going. And there's also about $100 million in COVID-19 care money to help people pay their rent. It's that simple. It doesn't take rocket science to figure out that people are going to need actual cash to be able to make their rent during the pandemic. So there is actual things that we're doing, that we're committed to doing, but we're going to continue to push for more and do better. But there's stuff on the table currently going through the process to make sure that we are doing things differently. Mr. O'Farrell.
Thank you, Madam President. I want to thank this panel for not just the work you've done and the research you've done and the great care that you have through your lived experience and how that's communicated to us today in person. Very, very powerful. I want to thank you for opening up a space for us as well. That has served a great purpose for me personally and professionally in this moment. I do my best to make decisions based on appreciating and understanding a perspective. And I'm reflecting as I'm hearing everyone speak today on a piece of perspective that has been part of my life, but really began to be more useful than ever. And that was back in 2015. I'm of Native American heritage on my mother's side. In fact, my grandfather was chief of my tribe. And I knew that we had a stain on our city administrative code. And that was that we officially celebrated Columbus Day in the city of Los Angeles. I took serious issue with that. And through the wise counsel of then Council President Herb Wesson, we had lots of conversations early on about how I could work to eliminate that because of all that went into that incredible offensive symbol and yearly celebration, not just in the city of Los Angeles, but across the country. And through that 2-year process, we elevated the fact that genocide occurred in our own country, that once Native Americans had been reduced in incredible numbers, even as early as the 1600s, and the struggles that happened across the entire Western Hemisphere, how that helped lead into the African slave trade, and how this country was built on forced labor, slavery, and genocide. And I think that we're still living with the systems that were established in those times. And I've talked about that over the years, and that is very, very present in my approach to policy. And I think we have an opportunity to go beyond dismantling the institutional structures that oppress. We know that there is a warrior mentality in police departments across the United States. That reality didn't come out of nowhere. There's a reason for that, and we all know that. So we have a lot of work to do, and we do need our partners. Clearly, you're holding our feet to the fire, as you should, and you will continue doing that, and I expect nothing less. But we also need to remember, in terms of education, in terms of the healthcare system, and in terms of jurisdictional responsibilities, it's important to note that the county budget of $35.5 billion is scheduled traditionally to be adopted by the end of June, with a final budget adoption by the end of September. They're our partners in this effort as well. They're our partners in reimagining what public safety looks like. They're our partners in imagining what it looks like to deliver these resources to our neighborhoods that have been traditionally marginalized and overlooked. Lastly, I'll say this. Back in September, this council, through my efforts, hosted a summit on poverty. That generated a report that I will now share with all of you. It was heard in council and adopted in council back in March. Then COVID happened. We will hear follow-up instructions from that report from experts in the field who have the lived experience on policy and funding ideas for how to invest in our neighborhoods that have literally never had it. So I think the dismantling, the reimagining has begun, but every one of you are absolutely right. What is it that we're going to do now? And I encourage everyone listening to be part of that conversation. Again, thank you for this moment, because we're in this constructive phase of how can we take a good, clear look at what reimagining what public safety, what law enforcement, what all these institutions will look like as we put the building blocks of change in place and apply the funding accordingly. Thank you.
Because I know we're out of time. One, we want to encourage you to remember that you have power in the city. And so we know that there's the county budget, but there's also the city budget. So we've been encouraging people to think about, where do you have power, even in your own households, right? So we have, in my household, we have completely abolition of police in my household completely. We have a different public safety plan, right? If you work in a neighborhood, how can you push police out of your neighborhoods? Kendrick is doing work in Hollywood and holding on to power there and saying, how can we move police off of sets, right? And so it's important to think about, as our city council, we know there's a county budget, but there's also a city budget. So please don't just look and say, well, let's get the county to do something. What can the city do right now? We also want to lift up that you said you're happy we're holding your feet to the fire. This is tiring for us too. We don't want to have to constantly hold your feet to the fire. What we would love is for you to step out, be bold, be courageous, and we want to fight alongside you against the undue influence of the Protective League, against those who say that we can't do this, and for an implemented, reimagined public safety. So just as much as we will, call you out on social media or sometimes show up, we also want to make sure that you know that if you're courageous, there are millions of people who will stand alongside you, celebrate with you, and fight with you. Fight with you.
Thank you.
And just one more thing. Okay, so y'all know it is Hollywood. Y'all see these headlines made all the time of movies that got greenlit and, movies that are being made and in development and such. And then you don't see headlines about them ever again. But every once in a while, you get one that shakes up the world where everybody is paying attention, right? City councils all over the country are making those headlines. And those headlines are going to be framed and kept forever. I want y'all to imagine what your headline is going to be. What headline do y'all want framed? Y'all can shake up the world by the decisions that you make. What statement are y'all going to make that is going to make headlines that shakes things up? Because to be honest, what we say in the movement all the time, the movement moves without you. This movement is going to move whether you like it or not. What side of history are y'all going to be on? What headline is going to be framed and reposted and celebrated for history, throughout history, that started right here in Los Angeles? Just imagine the first thing that y'all can imagine. And I'm talking about implementable strategies, something that is actionable, that is going to happen, that is a commitment. What is that headline? What is that headline that y'all are going to make? And I know y'all can do it. And when y'all do that, y'all help us. That is what helps the movement move. That's what builds momentum and encourages us and helps us heal from being traumatized. What are y'all going to do to help us heal after we've been out there and been, beat up by these folks, by the police, for exercising our right and trying to fight for our communities? What headlines are y'all going to make? I can't wait to see it.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
All right, friends. So that was the review of the People's Budget by a coalition of different organizations that did a beautiful job today, sharing with us what our community findings were. This is the time where we actually need to keep the pressure up and call your city council member, tell them that you watched the video, that you are in support of the people's budget. Get involved. You can do that with this link. I run a mutual aid and a lot of other organizing efforts. This is to amplify the work that already other organizations are doing, the beautiful work that other organizations are doing. To change everything, it needs everyone. So please get involved. We need you more than ever. I have been organizing for many years. Last night, I went to the Black Lives Matter organizing meeting, and it was absolutely uplifting and amazing, and it was exactly what I needed to be and what I needed to hear. So please, yourself, get involved with your local organization. If you still don't know what to do, you can use this link, Get Involved LA, and let's just organize for a better world for all of us. I hope you guys have an amazing Monday. And if this is something that you find helpful, please share it with your contacts and with your friends. If this is, if you missed it, because a lot of people also message me to say, I missed the talk or I missed the stream, nothing to worry about. You can go to my YouTube channel or any of my social media where this has been broadcast, and you can see it there. I hope that you're all having a wonderful day, and I talk to you very soon. And please stay encouraged. Bye.